From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. This is episode 578. I am Andrew, entry in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek, DV3 in the forum, and DV3G and DV384 on X. Derek, we have another special guest today.
Yeah, super exciting. Ken, a.k.a. Stildo33. He was on the show a couple years back, and it was a lot of fun, so we figured that we could put up with him at the very least one more time, Andrew.
It begins.
Ken? It begins. Ken, welcome back to the show.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me back. Excited to be here again.
Yeah, so I wanted to kick off the show asking about your new business venture, which involves, in part, you beating up on kids on NBA 2K. Tell us how you came up with this idea and how the business works.
Yeah, so the business that I started, I'm doing it with my boys. My younger ones are almost 12 and 13 and want to kind of prepare them for later in life. And I was thinking through different ideas on what we could do together. And all of us play video games, and got the idea. I've seen these around before, but we started a video game truck. So essentially what a video game truck is, it's a trailer outfitted with high definition TVs. And then you have PlayStation 5s on them, Xbox, then a couple Nintendo Switches. And then it has a multitude of games that are popular today. The 2K series is popular, Madden's popular. And then you've got other games like Fortnite that kids like to play, and some of the Super Mario stuff. What's been fun so far is kids, when I host a birthday party or go to a school event or something, come up and go, "Oh, Ken, will you play basketball with me? Are you any good?" And I kind of get this little smirky grin. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm okay. I've played, a little bit here and there." And then we'll jump right into a game, and they'll be down 35-6, and they're like, "What's happening?" I'm like, I'm just here playing, having fun, guys." And usually when I'm playing, I'll go grab one of the teams from like the 90s or even the 80s, because the kids laugh. They're like, "Oh, you're not going to use Steph Curry or LeBron?" I'm like, "I don't need those guys." So that's how it started. That's the fun of getting into it.
So I love the fact that you're not taking it easy on them. I'd be the exact same way. It's like, I'm not going to let this snotty kid beat me on this video game. Have you been beat, though? Has a kid taken you to school on the virtual hardwood? And how did you handle that?
Great question. I did have an older kid beat me. He was a late teenager, I'll say it that way. And he went and grabbed the legendary Warriors team with Durant and Curry, from that era. And I was playing with the 08 Celtics at the time. And it came down to kind of how the modern game is played today. And it's just a lot of 3-pointers. And if you're shooting 55% from the 3-point line and you're not making as many and keeping up with those percentages, it's really difficult to pull off a win. And I had beat him a couple times before that. So this was, I think, our third or fourth game where he finally got me. And I shared a story last time of, trash talking, and you and I have had some of our battles. And of course, there's lots of that, and in a fun, playful way. But yeah, tons of fun, of course, as always. And it's fun watching those guys and playing with other people that are really good at the technical side of that game, which doesn't happen too often. But even just like the timing of a release on a shot, basketball games have evolved so much over the years, right? You've got to time the shot, the release and everything, versus what they were 25 years ago, where all you had to do is just put a button and the release is perfect every time. So it's fun to see some of these guys with skills, whereas your younger players typically don't have that yet, which is why they get beat by 30 points.
That's really cool. And I love that concept of a video game truck, because we grew up very much playing in person at somebody's house, in arcades, obviously, very big back in the day. We had a couple of chains here in Australia. Time Zone is a very popular one. Any fellow Aussies listening to the show will probably have some nostalgic memories of that one. And there's a lot of online play these days, and it leads to a lot of toxicity, obviously. But I like that in-person play, because I think you need to cooperate. You need to actually be able to get along with people to play to a certain extent. You can trash talk, you can maybe banter and everything, but I say this having heard you tell stories about getting into a fist fight with a friend back in the day. But you need to overcome that. If you do get into it with a friend, you need to be able to get past that. So I think there's something special about playing in person. And I know Derek is definitely big on couch co-op and couch head-to-head, and rightfully so. So this is bringing that to kids.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It is a much different experience when you're playing with someone live next to you. The tension that you have different when it's a close game. I think the level of competitive banter back and forth certainly elevates itself a little bit versus when you're playing with someone, 1,000 miles away or across the world or wherever. And even if you have a headset on, it's not the same as sitting next to each other.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also want to point something out about that matchup, and I think you would agree, Ken. The '08 Celtics are very underdone in NBA 2K games, and trying to use somebody like Kevin Garnett in the high post and actually do his realistic moves on the block is almost impossible, right? So you're already kind of at a disadvantage there because the guy that you're playing there, when he's using Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, he's not trying to operate in those areas, right? He's firing away from downtown, which is what the games are kind of made for. So you trying to use the '08 Celtics in a modern title, the way that they really played, lockdown defense, locking down the paint, switchable on defense, being versatile on offense, low post, high post, all of that, and 3-point shooting. I feel like you're already at a disadvantage in that matchup on those video games. Would you agree?
Oh, totally. Huge disadvantage. It's the evolution of the basketball game over the last 20 years. When you look back at the early 2K games through, 2K10, 14, there's a lot more strategy that was needed in some of those games. And then as the Curry era came about, it's just a matter of swinging the ball around the horn until somebody's open and you jack a shot up.
Or if they're not open.
Or if they're not open, you jack a shot up.
Yeah, they'll just jack them up, yeah.
So, yeah, a team like the '08 Celtics is a terrible matchup for something like that, and really against any of these modern-day teams, right? And I think that's it's sad that the game has evolved to that, and some of that strategy is gone. Granted, the three of us grew up watching, people like Kevin McHale and Shaquille O'Neal and those guys operate in the post, and Hakeem Olajuwon, and there's nobody even close to that today.
Stuck watching Alex Len, yeah.
Yeah.
And you do see that, absolutely, in games. I've gone back and played a lot of mid-2000s to late 2000s 2Ks. That's been my kick for the last couple of years, rediscovering those games, getting into them, being more of a minded to the dribbling system they had at the time, the original isomotion that I couldn't get into back then because I was such a live fanboy, to be honest, at the time, being able to get into those games. And some of the post mechanics, and Live had it as well, with Own the Paint in '08 and '09, but just 2K6, 2K7, 2K8, around that time, the post control they had, so deep, so satisfying. And it's there in the early 2010s as well, but you can definitely see it going away because the game is changing, to your point. So you see it on the virtual hardwood, and obviously sim games are going to reflect reality. That's what we want them to do. But when you try to play with those classic teams and those classic players in recent 2Ks, yeah, it just doesn't feel the same. You don't have that control and that dominance in the paint.
Yeah, and that's it's unfortunate that some of those games play that way, which, aside from just shooting, if you're not going to post up, now you've got to learn, Derek would attest to this, that you've got to learn the other skills on the sticks if you're going to compete. You've got to learn how to shift the defense, tapping the stick one way and then turboing back the other direction, using the movement, just like you would in a real basketball game, right? That is one thing that those games do really well if you use it correctly, though, which is why I still play a lot of NBA 2K19 as an example, is the controls on there are so fluid and allow you to feel like you're totally in control of a player. And I think some of that has gotten lost. More isn't necessarily better. And I think we've lost a little bit of that with the last couple of 2Ks, in my opinion. Yeah, just it makes it not as fun when you can't do what you're wanting to do as a basketball player.
Yeah, I think on 2K19, you and I actually spent a decent amount of time working on like your one-on-one game, right? Yeah. We went into practice quite a few times and working on, crossovers behind the backs, working on that first step, that triple threat game, right? And, so you could do some of the stuff that I was doing with Kendall Gill, right? Or with quick guards and whatnot. And I do love that about NBA 2K19, but I also think that stuff was in the past games, like the NLSC top 10 plays of the week. Andrew talked about this highlight. The most recent release, I did a hesitation dribble and then crossed my guy over with Jason Williams, left him in the dust, drew the next defender, and did a no-look pass to Chris Webber, and he threw it down, right? So that stuff was still necessary in the older titles, but then you also had the freedom that you should have, and that's more realistic as it relates to being in the post and in the high post. And 2K19 is a little bit better than the newer titles. But I think you would agree, in the newer titles, just one of the biggest weaknesses is you're being suctioned constantly into a defender. So there's no way to really create space or get blue sky in areas that real basketball players can, right? And like you could in the older titles. And when you try to do a spin move in the post, your defender is just like attached to you. And then the badges come into play and everybody's suctioned into each other. And then you're missing layups that no NBA player, with the exception of LeBron last night, would miss, et cetera. So I think that they've gone backwards in the control department for pretty much everything inside the 3-point line. And I think that's what frustrates me.
Yep. I totally agree. That's why I made that comment earlier of, more is not necessarily better, right? It's every year a new game comes out. They're trying to make it better and improvement, as they should. But some things just work really well and you don't have to change a lot. And I know that, I think it was 2K18 where you could kind of just blow past everybody. And it felt very arcadish, I thought. And I thought that was a big step backwards compared to 2K17. But there was an aspect of that made it simple to play, but it felt like one of the older, like NBA Live 2003 kind of games, very arcadish. So with 2K18 specifically, I felt like it just became very arcadish, which is several steps back from the previous versions. 2K19 came out, made it really, still I think plays the best. And then they've slowly just regressed again. And it's the player suction is the one that drives me nuts the most. And then some of the animations, because they keep trying to add in all these different animations, some of them are really good, and then some of them just look really bad, like they had to change something because they've used it too many times, and it doesn't look fluid at all.
Yeah. And
I don't understand how in the modern era of technology, we don't have to have 1,000 animations. The first 500 might work really well.
Right. Right. Also, how has foot planning got worse, right? Like, how's that gotten worse with better technology? Because I know that was one of the things you talked to me about when we first talked about 2K25. It's like my players are sliding everywhere. I don't have control. And Andrew would agree with you about 2K18, and he would probably agree with you about that comparison to NBA Live 2003, because as big of a live head as Andrew was, he'll tell you he was not a fan of NBA Live 2003.
Oh, for sure. I will say that 2003 I like a lot more than 2K18. I can go back and play Live 2003 today, and it's one of those games that I've come to appreciate more in hindsight. I liked it at the time because of the freestyle control, and it was the new game. I was, 18 when it came out, so I'm still kind of in that real fanboy phase, I suppose. Still young enough to be a bit of a fanboy, and I suppose some people never grow out of being fanboys, really, but certainly I was young enough to really kind of want to push that as, it's the new game, it's the best game, I love Live and all that kind of stuff, even though I'd had my criticisms of Live 2002, and 2001 for that matter, and I appreciate all those games more, including 2003, a little bit more today, able to appreciate them for what they are and what they brought to the table, but yeah, I like 2004 a little bit more, 2005 and 06 a lot more than 2003, more the style of play that I want. But yeah, everything said about 2K18 felt like such a huge step back after 2K17, and it was disappointing. 2K19, which I also really like as well, one of my favorites, it was a real course correction.
Yeah. Like, one of the cool things that the games have done that have evolved over time, when they work correctly, I think it was it 2K14 that first came out with kind of the badge, but they only had, each player, Larry Bird had like the 3-minute closeout badge and then like the sharpshooter badge or whatever it was called at the time, where the best players had two or three of them.
Yeah, 2K13.
I couldn't remember what they're called.
2K13, 2K14 had signature skills, and players had a maximum of 6. And now they brag about how there's 120 badges in the game, and this player's got 77, and this one's got 55, and do they all do something? And then they actually mention in the developer blogs, we removed these badges that did nothing. Well, you knew that. You just added it just to say, we've got this cool new badge this year. So to your point about animations, it feels like they're adding content and these features and mechanics just for the sake of having them, saying, there's a brand new mechanic. Well, does it work? Not really. We can polish it, I suppose, but instead of staying the course, and I mentioned in my 2K9 retrospective recently that was a game that didn't have a lot of big new innovations, but it stayed the course with its staples, and it improved the gameplay. It fixed issues from the previous year, from 2K8. So that's what you need sometimes. You don't need these big new features. They're nice, and they're nice if they work out and they're well designed, but simply fixing up the gameplay and improving it year to year and correcting course like that, I think is an underrated improvement. Everyone wants the big bells and whistles, and certainly the suits do, because that's what you slap on the box, that's what you put in all the previews. I understand that, but yeah, adding this stuff that they have to fix later on. And before we move on, when you mention the animations, I do wonder if bringing in Pro Play, which as Derek and I have said, is ultimately a great idea, but there's some new tech working with old tech and not really playing nice.
Yeah, that's really well said. It feels like if you look at another franchise like Grand Theft Auto, they don't make that game every single year. They make it like every 5 or 6. Now, totally different concept because, new graphics, new technology, but they take their time and they don't rush the title out, and it's massively popular every time. And a sports game, because the players change every year, the teams change every year, at the very least, we want an updated roster, right? But it does seem like about every 3rd or 4th title tends to do really well and play well, and then the others are just rushed hack jobs. To your point, like, hey, these badges don't work, this other thing doesn't work. I'm real curious to see how the NBA eras improves. The biggest challenge in that, of course, is getting probably the license agreement to get enough players to fill out a roster. But as I've messed around with that a decent amount now on NBA 2K25, I love the fact that as you go from, the Magic Bird era, hey, here's the rule that changed. The Pacers changed their uniforms. Sacramento Kings are not in Kansas anymore. They've changed, and all that stuff's done automatically. So, I think that's a cool improvement if you're into the dynasty mode and want to go through all those old eras. I think they've done that really well. I don't know that I've played around with it enough to see every bug in it. I'd be curious what you guys think on that one.
Yeah, so basically, there's definitely inaccuracies as it relates to art when you move on to new seasons. Some of it is right, some of it is wrong. Some of the courts are right, some of them are wrong. Sometimes they have the same court from the Kobe era all the way up through the LeBron era, and the court had actually changed, right? So there's still quite a few inaccuracies. I think that the other issue is there's still a lot of fakes as well. There's a lot of missing players at the ends of the benches. There's a lot of rush jobs as far as, tendencies, attributes, signatures, and whatnot. And then a lot of the errors teams, in my opinion, are also incredibly underdone from like a movement perspective, from, their ability to dribble the ball, their ability to get up and down the court, their quickness, etc. And I've used examples of players like Michael Finley and whatnot. So I have trouble playing the My NBA Eras rosters due to the inaccuracies art-wise, but mostly due to how the players play on the floor. Now, there's good rosters on 2K Share that you can download, but not many of them really touch up on the tendencies and attributes, right? They may have created players in there that fill the rosters, but they either lack the knowledge or don't have the patience to go through and actually make those teams play like their real life counterpart, to have the players be as explosive as they really were, etc. So, my brother and I spent well over 100 hours working on a Kobe era roster, which is reflecting the 02-03 season. That's the start of it. And It did. It took well over 100 hours, Ken, for us to make that play kind of the way that we wanted to give the players the respect that they deserve and whatnot. So I understand why it's hard for a community member, why it's hard for an average Joe to actually put in the amount of time it takes to make all of this right. And that includes things like art, like creating courts and the court creator creating jerseys that are wrong in the jersey creator, etc. And I think Andrew would agree. I think that it really is a true combination of the art, the game's default gameplay engine, and the way the players are made and play on the floor that is just kind of turns us off from using those rosters.
It definitely does. It definitely does. And to your point about rosters on 2K Share, I think people want to be the first one to get that fixed roster out there, that quote-unquote fixed roster, so they can say 200,000 downloads on 2K Share. They can brag about it because they got it out first. But to be first, they don't go to the trouble of fixing all those attributes. And we've all worked on rosters, as you said, Derek, hundreds, thousands of hours to get a roster right if you're doing it properly, if you're getting all of those tendencies, all of those ratings correct. And there are a lot of them. I mean, going back and making some updates for earlier lives, as I've done here and there, and I've got a few projects cooking in the background, as I've said before, there's not as many ratings and attributes to work with. And that simplicity does allow those rosters to come together a bit more quickly, but you still need to be detailed. But if you're trying to get that first roster out there, then there are these rush jobs, and you're not doing that much better than 2K.
Yeah, think about this. So, Ken, the 85-86 roster that I sent you, how much time have you actually spent on that, even just playing exhibition games, and why? Right? It's because when you're using World Be Free, you feel like you're using World Be Free. Right? When, you put the Jazz on the floor and you're up and down the court with Adrian Dantley, Karl Malone, Bobby Hansen, and whatnot, you feel like you're really using that Jazz team and whatnot. And that's what we want. But yeah, from spending 5+ years on the 2K19 retro season rosters, how much work goes into this, how much of a time commitment it is. And if you really think about it, you are like in the less than 1% of the population that would ever spend this much time, right, on a video game.
Yep.
Modding it, editing it, and whatnot. So, that was one of my questions for later in the show, but we might as well bring it up now. 2K19, you're still working on the retro seasons. You've been working on them for 5+ years. You absolutely love that game and love that project. How do you keep doing this? Like, how long do you plan on continuing this project? What are your plans moving forward?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Great question. So, growing up playing these basketball games, like I started playing Lakers versus Celtics on the PC, late 80s or whenever that even came out. And even back as a kid, I always wanted to play like franchise mode. Well, the old games eventually came out with that. And as the games got better, then I'm sitting there looking in the mirror going or in the rear view mirror going, I want to play all the things I grew up watching, the 80s and 90s and experience all that. And as the technology has gotten better in the games, you feel like you're playing with Dominique Wilkins if he's done correctly. You feel like you're playing with, John Bagley if he's done correctly. So that part, I think that game itself has an amazing framework to allow you to do all of these things. Plus, you can mod it once you figure out what you're doing as a modder and how to, add in art and courts and cyber faces and all that stuff. And, there's certain people that have really good skills doing that. And one of those other skills is just editing the roster. You had a huge help spending 100 some hours redoing that 85-86. But I don't know how many hours I've spent just playing that roster alone since you've redone that, Derek. Probably 100, because now I'm going through a my league with it and playing with the Celtics, the Bulls, the Jazz, and the Lakers. And I know what's going to happen. I'm on the 87 season now. Is when Reggie Miller gets drafted, I'm going to probably want to play some with the Pacers. When Shaq comes to Orlando, I'm going to want to play with them. So I'm going to end up playing with probably every team when it's all said and done. But it's a real skill to figure out attributes. you've gone through, and you and I have spent, tons of hours just, teaching each other, really you teaching me on how to properly edit those. But then the tendencies, that's just a different animal altogether. A guy like Patrick Ewing should be playing point guard, but when you download a random roster from 2K, sometimes guys don't take the time to work out little bugs that are in the game like that. And next thing you know, you've got, someone that, Zach Edey bringing the ball up the floor, or a player like him that would never happen in real life. So I really appreciate the fact that, like, you and your brother have spent thousands of hours probably modding rosters over the years to figure out how tendencies work. So when you watch, games of some of these old players, you know exactly what you need to go and edit. And some things are real easy, right? Like, if you're making an 80s roster, no one did the Euro step, back then. Geez, maybe Drazen Petrovic, or no.
I saw
Marshall
Moses do it in the All-Star game. Actually, Moses Malone did the Euro step in the middle of an All-Star game. I actually posted that video.
Oh, yeah, you did.
On Twitter. I will say this: while they weren't calling it the Euro step back then, if you watch full games back then, there were variations of it being done, but they never called it that, right? They would call it like a side step or something like that. But yeah, it's funny because you even see a big guy like Moses back then being graceful doing that.
Yeah. So trying to translate that into a video game based on what is already behind the engine and what tendencies they give you, what the badges do, like, that's a whole different level of science itself. But the criticism I always have of 2K is you have a whole development team that's programmed and coded this. You could probably put 2 or 3 people on there during one off season, in between games, to just figure a lot of this stuff out and figure the bugs out. It wouldn't be hard. Look how much, like, Derek, like you and I have done on one game with just a handful of hours. We're not getting paid to do it either. We're just having fun because we like the game.
Right. And the thing too is, like, we're on there, we're not just editing attributes and tendencies, which, by the way, like you said, anybody could do. In fact, 2K, and I've said this on prior episodes, they could hire a couple people who would do it for free, right? There's so many passionate community members out there as it relates to these games. They would do it for free. They wouldn't even have to pay them. But the point is, it's not just attributes and tendencies. It's when you go on the court with these teams and you shoot a shot with them, whether it be off balance or in the post fadeaway or just their straight up and down shot, there's so many variations of signatures that you can do. And some of the games also have animation blending. You really can, when you spend enough time on these games, basically find a signature shot that works for any player, right? Past or present. Because, like, you go on and you use that 85, 86 roster on 2K19, Adrian Dantley shooting just like himself, right? Yep. Even somebody like Alex English, who has a strange shot, we were able to nail that. World Be Free, one of the most unique shots in NBA history. You shoot a shot with him and it's like, man, this looks just like what I saw when I watch him on video. But you're right. The tools are there in the game to make these rosters accurate, to give the players and those teams the respect that they deserve, that they should have, that they earned. And they don't care. It's low priority for them. I think Andrew would absolutely agree. Him and I tried to jump on and play a game of the Kobe era roster, and we were using just the default 2K roster, and it was a piss poor experience.
Disaster.
We also tried the same thing. Yeah, we tried the same thing with a 90s roster using Sean Kemp and whatnot, and using Sean Kemp was miserable. You can't do anything with him. There's no coast to coast with Sean Kemp using my NBA rosters.
It was worse than that 2K10 1992 roster. There's more accuracy in that 92 roster mod for NBA 2K10 than the my NBA rosters. Yeah,
a game that came out 15 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But yeah, Andrew would definitely agree on all of this.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that just a little bit of TLC has not been applied to that. And I get it. It doesn't put any more money in the company's pockets, which is why they don't do it, because they got to move on to the microtransactions for the next season.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is obviously the priorities are higher on the money-making modes, the online modes, the microtransactions, my team, all of that stuff. Andrew, you edited rosters back in the 90s, right? And you still edit for those older games today. Like you still, pick up the older, the 90s lives, the mid 2000s lives, and you're still editing those rosters. One thing that I know you appreciate is the simplicity and the ease of editing those old games, but also the expectations, right? When you actually hit the virtual hardwood are definitely lower as far as, with those games, you don't have signature shots for the players, so you don't have to mess with that. You have less attributes that you need to edit. Do you miss that?
I do sometimes. Now, I think that's one of the reasons why my NBA 2K11 rosters, my attempts at updating that for the current day, fell apart. Also, a declining interest in the current product, obviously. That didn't help at all. The fact that during the shutdown, I had the golden opportunity to catch up finally and complete that roster and just didn't feel motivated to work on it, I think speaks volumes to not feeling the current NBA and not really wanting to make that current roster. And you've identified that, Derek, why that fell apart for me. That's absolutely true. But certainly I think I was biting off more than I could chew with the amount of attributes and things that I needed to edit. For the first time, I needed to start out a bit smaller. It had been a while since I'd made a roster, and coming from NBA Live with fewer attributes, fewer animations and things to edit that I was working with. Absolutely. And that is overwhelming. And I think that's another reason why people do kind of rush, because once again, you want to be the first one out there. You want to be much like people rush to make the first new Kobe face or the new missing rookies faces back in the day, in the heyday of NBA Live modding. People wanted to be the first. There's always been that competitiveness. There wasn't the charging for mods, but that's a whole other issue that we've discussed before. But the competitiveness has always been there in the modding scene to some extent. So, yeah, if you skip that stuff, you do get the first roster out there, but it's not a very good one, unfortunately.
So, Ken, with the 2K19 rosters, I believe you said your goal was to create rosters at least up to 07-08. Is that still the goal?
Yeah, I had decided to go back just a little bit further and do the 84-85. I've got that roster done outside of about 25 or 30 players that still need edited, all their tendencies and all that stuff. But I've just here in the last couple of weeks got all the artwork done. The challenge on a game like modding that now is a lot of the people that were involved early on have kind of moved on, and other people that would help, make uniforms, whatever, they're working on, 2K23 or 24 now. So it's a less priority for other helping hands. So it's just taking longer to get some of the artwork, which I'm not great at, as you know. But we got everything for that finally. And then I'm also going through and using that 85-86. I want to redo some of those other rosters with those tendencies already added. I think it would really enhance the current content, take it to a 2.0 version, so to speak, and kind of re-edit some of those and touch those up. But I want to go all the way up through at least the 2008 season is still my goal, maybe even through the 2010. That way we can get Kobe's kind of back-to-back title years in there as well, too. That's the goal. I have no idea how long that's going to take. I certainly didn't think it was going to take 5 years. I thought within 5 years I'd probably be there. But the challenge in doing a roster is, as the community of that dies off a little bit or loses interest, my interest, I get pulled into other games.
Definitely.
And it's a lot of work, right? Yeah. It's a lot of work when you edit a roster. It's really boring. Sometimes you just want to sit and play the game, right? So I usually go through spurts where I'll get really into it for a couple of months, and then I take a month or two off and then kind of pick it back up.
Oh, it can be really
tedious. I'm right back at that pickup.
Yeah. It can be really tedious working on rosters. There's the really fun part where it's coming together, sort of in the early stages and the late stages when it's really coming together. But that middle part where you're working on all the really tedious parts, all the attributes, like we said, making sure it's right, creating some players, creating the players that aren't really exciting to create, some of the deep bench players that you don't want to spend that much time on them, but at the same time you need to because you want that accuracy from top to bottom. Absolutely. And yeah, getting motivated when the game is not getting as much attention. And look, you're doing it for passion. That's why we should be modding, for passion, and the enjoyment of creating this new experience to play with in these games that we love. But yeah, when it's not getting the same attention, the same downloads, when it's not getting the same help, like you say, it's hard to come together. It's hard to get motivated. It's harder to make that mod happen. And it's why I do like Derek, admire your efforts because I've been there and working on a game that is slowly losing popularity. And 4 games when I was updating the NLSC rosters towards the end there for Live 2005 to 08, I had my way of converting them, of course, but it's still a lot of work for, especially a couple of games that were not getting a lot of attention at the time. A couple of them are more popular than the other 2, so I really should have just focused on that, which in hindsight is absolutely what I should have done. But yeah, I also really admire sticking with a game that you really love and sticking with a project that you want to do. You're not doing current rosters because that's not what interests you. You're sticking with the retro season project, sticking to the seasons that you want to cover for the game you want to play. And that is so vital. Again, that is something that Derek has pointed out to me, that I was trying to update a game that I do really like, but is not necessarily an all-time favorite, to create something I don't really want to play with, and about an NBA that I'm not as fond of. So without that passion to push you through those tedious moments, that's really, really hard.
No, I think that's the thing as a modder to always keep in mind is the vision you had at the very beginning. What was your ultimate goal? You know it's going to be a lot of work, but it doesn't have to be done tomorrow.
Agreed.
Whereas, like, you see all these rosters that get uploaded right away to the point you were just making, hey, it's got to be uploaded. We got to be the first one out. We got to be the first one to do this. Well, that's cool, but it doesn't do you any good if it's not, accurate or it's a poor product.
You're kind of wasting somebody's time when you do that. That's the way I look at some of these 2K share rosters, is the rush jobs, the ones where it says like, 0203 complete, and then you go in and it's like 10% complete. It's like you just wasted somebody's time. They just downloaded that roster, threw it on the court, and they're not noticing any difference or whatnot. So no, I see where you're coming from there. It definitely feels like a waste of time.
Yeah. My favorite one, I don't even remember what year it was, here in the last 4 or 5 years, I went and downloaded a roster. It was before they had some of the 2008 Celtics on there. So it's probably been like 10 years. I went and downloaded the roster. And I'm like, ooh, 08 Celtics, cool. Someone's like taking the time to make it. Well, it just had Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen traded to the team, and that was it. Like,
yeah, I think you're talking about 2K15.
Where's everybody else?
I think that's and you go on there, and it's like those 3 playing with like Jay Crowder, and it's like, wait a minute, that's not the 07 08 Celtics.
There's so many of those rosters out there, and that's what's hard to sift through. But that's what's great about our community, right? Is, once stuff is posted, gets a little popularity, and you get a little traction, what's motivating as a modder is like, I could probably do this a little bit better. I could probably do this a little bit better. Like, for example, I started to go through thinking with these rosters, what else can I do to improve them? And I started like putting stats on a couple of them. And I think, Derek, you and I had a conversation like, hey, that's cool. You can do that. But like, don't forget you're trying to do, 20 years worth of rosters. And that was kind of your original goal. Like, you can always come back and just add this stuff later because it's not enhancing the gameplay, like improving the tendencies that enhances the gameplay or the attributes, etc. So it's nice that I've had someone like you and some others that have pushed me on those things. Like, hey, this is what's going to make the game better.
So, Ken, before we move on to the next question, I do want to point out that there is one end of the bench guy that Ken will spend a ton of time on editing to make sure he's accurate, and that's Greg Kite. I think Greg Kite your favorite player of all time, or he's at least top 5, right?
He's a top 10. He's not ahead of Scalabrini though.
I'll never forget playing against you with Greg Kite on the Orlando Magic on NBA 2K19. And you went on a flurry. I think you scored about 8 points in a quarter with him. And for Greg Kite, that's like 100 points, right? And you just kept sending me gifs of lobsters and pictures of lobsters because that's his nickname. And you were just absolutely dying, laughing at you putting me in the torture chamber, basically, with Greg Kite. We got to connect again and play some early 90s 2K19. I think we should maybe consider continuing that 94 and 95 season because I do miss it. That was a lot of fun. I did want to bring up really quick though before the next question. So this business venture, does it have a name and does it have a website for people to sign up?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Battle Gaming Truck is the name of the game truck in the business. And then the website is battlegamingtruck.com. Currently, I'm just located in central northern Indiana. So right now I've just got one of these, just getting it off the ground. Hopefully I'll be able to expand at some point, but for anyone that's kind of in that area, might be appropriate. However, not to send people to competition, there's a lot of other entities out there that do video game trucks, especially in the major metropolitan areas. So, I think if you just jump on Google and look, well, unfortunately, I'm not there. There are some other great ones out there too. Highly recommend.
Cool. Well, you gave us the name though, and you gave the website. So if any of our listeners are interested, they know where to go. I would have loved to have something like that when I was a kid. That would have been excellent. Like if I had a parent that said, "Hey, do you want to have a truck pull up and have the newest games, and you can battle it out with other kids and all of that stuff?" That's something that I would be interested in. I'm sure Andrew as well.
Of course,
mobile arcade.
I'm, of course, thinking of the Poolmobile from The Simpsons because I always think Simpsons.
That's awesome.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So, Ken, we asked a community question related to favorite non-licensed basketball video games, and you mentioned Ultimate Basketball for the NES. Tell us about your experience with that game and why you liked it so much. I talked about it a little bit on the show, talking about those cut scenes and the little mini games that are in it and all of that stuff. What was your experience with that game?
Yeah, so that game so when I first saw that game, it was in a magazine. These games were, outside of like Super Mario Brothers 3 or the huge titles, they were advertised on TV. You couldn't go into Best Buy and see a demo of it or the arcades or anything else for that matter, because the NES games, most of those arcade games never made it to NES, right? And I just saw it in a magazine one day. And what caught my attention was the zoomed in graphic. And it looked like Double Dribble. And I'm like, oh, this is like a new and improved version of Double Dribble, maybe. So I ordered it, picked it up, started playing it, and it felt a little bit more smooth. But the two things that caught my attention were the close-up graphics, like when you shoot a three-pointer. Like if you get one of the 5, main spots, it would like do a zoom in, which at the time that technology was it wasn't in games like that for sport title. I thought that was just unbelievable. But then the minigame aspect, I think that was one of the first basketball games, at least the first ones I can remember, one of the first ones that I can remember of, that had a minigame where you drove into the basket, had a little shot meter across the bottom. You had to stop the ball in the middle of it in order to make the dunk. And I think free throws worked that way as well.
Back then, I said that on the show, a dunk meter. That's amazing. And a lot of these kids today, they think that these are all like new ideas and new features. That game is over 35 years old, and it had it. That's crazy.
Yeah. But it's interesting to see what, we talked about the evolvement of games over the years, but like that was one of the first big things where the game didn't decide if you made or missed that shot. You did. And, shortly after that, as some of the things moved to the Sega system and the Super Nintendo and all of those, the free throw meter change where now you had to like line up 2 different things to make a free throw. And, the player's ability was determined, the speed of the meter was determined by how good or bad a free throw shooter was. Right. So I feel like that was one of the first big steps in basketball video games that tried to add just a little bit more to make it more challenging and add a little bit more that made it more challenging. But I also felt like Ultimate Basketball was one of the first ones that kind of that next step in the graphical enhancements. And it played well. It played really smooth. If nobody's ever played that game, I think it came out in like 1990, and you like those old basketball games, it's worth playing. Very much looks and feels like Double Dribble. It just plays really well. I think, if I remember right, it has like a tournament mode and stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Andrew loves the T meter. That's what you were describing for free throws.
That's it.
Andrew will break his controller if he has to use the early NBA 2K green arrow setup. There were some really, really shoddy attempts at trying to make free throws unique in certain basketball games. And like Andrew has pointed out in the past, why not just go with the simple T-meter, right?
Reinventing the wheel.
It makes sense, right? Shaq goes up to the line and it goes 100 miles an hour, but you get Reggie Miller up to the line and, you can relax because it's going to go pretty slow. And it actually made a lot of sense. But yeah, there's been some really bad free throw implementations in the past.
Yeah. When I did my tribute to the T-meter last year for Way Back Wednesday, I shared it on our Facebook page, and somebody mentioned from the pull quote, because I said that it was the best of the early free throw shooting mechanics, and someone said, no, 2Ks with the arrows was much better. It was superior. And, everyone's entitled to their opinion, obviously, but I feel like some people master complex and contrived mechanics or broken mechanics and think they're great, and they kind of focus on the fact that they've been able to master this broken system. And you know what? I'm going to do it. Bart versus the Space Mutants, Derek. I can beat that first level really easily, but that doesn't make it a great game. It doesn't mean that isn't a broken game, as you know, because you played it recently, or a few weeks back from memory, that you gave it a go, and you were reminded how broken that game was. So I think people have a bit of myopia around mastering broken or contrived and complex mechanics. And look, I don't want to downplay their opinions. Everyone's entitled to their opinions, and if you like it, you like it. But I can't shake the feeling that some people like the mechanics simply because they're able to master them, and they think, well, I was able to master this really hard mechanic, so it was a really good idea. But no, T-meter all the way.
So, Ken, Andrew and I have recorded almost 300 episodes of the NLSC podcast together, and he's probably brought up Bart versus the Space Mutants for NES, probably in half of them, at least.
Easily.
That's how often. That's how often he brings up this absolutely terrible, piss poor video game. It's really bad. And Andrew will even say that, even though he brings it up as a constant comparison. It's not a good video game.
Oh, that's why I bring it up. I mean, it's the best example I can give of broken mechanics and nostalgia for mechanics that are busted. Quite frankly, it's the most triumphant example I can think of a game that I'm nostalgic for, despite not being good, and bad mechanics that you can master, but that doesn't make them good. So it's a favorite for many reasons, but it is not a good game by any stretch of the imagination.
Ken, Ultimate Basketball, though, you talk about the cutscenes, you talk about those gameplay mechanics. I think that a lot of those same mechanics were in Tecmo Super NBA Basketball and Tecmo NBA Basketball for NES. I believe you said you had a good experience with those games as well. Am I right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The whole Tecmo series was one of the higher points of basketball video game play in my life, because I was a teenager in high school when playing all of those. And many, many sleepovers started, especially on the Super Tecmo version of NBA basketball, because that was one of the first games I remember. If you had certain players, you could get to some right spots on the floor. And these were like the unsung hero guys. Like Tim Legler was unstoppable on that game. I think it was the Genesis version. There's a little spot you could get with him right at the top of the key, 3-point line area, and like he would shoot 60-70%. And it was one of those things that, like, some of those older games had those little Easter eggs with players in there. Like on Tecmo NBA Basketball, you could go with Bird to the upper corner on the top of the screen and shoot a fadeaway, and he would make 8 out of 10 all the time. I felt like that was a little bit of a carryover from Double Dribble, where you could go to the 3 in the corner and just never miss. Those are just some great times in some of those old games. And of course, when it's part of your childhood, those always stand out as some of the great ones, right? Tons of fun with those.
Jeff Hornacek in Tecmo Super NBA Basketball also had a spot. I think it was like the left elbow extended 3. Pretty sure you could make that like 8 to 9 times out of 10, like every single time. I
didn't even know that with him. Now I got to go fire that up and try that.
And I think Dan Marley also had a spot. I can't remember where it was. We spent a ton of time on Tecmo Super NBA Basketball. And my team was the Pistons with Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Orlando Woolridge, Dennis Rodman. And Lambeer. And I love that game. The pace was so much faster than Bulls versus Blazers, right? It was faster than NBA Showdown. It was faster than Lakers versus Celtics. It felt more fluid and more like real NBA action. And I think that's what drew me the most to that game.
Yeah. That little era of games right there that came out was the first time you felt like it had a fast pace to it. And you had to be skilled enough. You know, granted, if you go play these games now, they don't seem like they're all that quick, but go fire up, Bulls versus the Blazers and then go play one of these games. It feels like you go from a dinosaur to a Ferrari really quick. That's how much of a leap they had back then in that time, right? So the speed and pace of those games, you had to be quick on the fingers to execute some of those things, or it was a turnover, just like you do in today's games. But that was really when the shift in technology era really started to happen. You had those big leaps year after year.
And then came NBA Live 95.
Forward. Yeah, that's where it really started. Andrew, do you think for you on Live 95, was it Showdown 94? That was the last one where it was the broadcast sideways view, right?
Correct. Yeah.
See, I still love that game. I thought that, granted, because it was the last of that sideways view, but it played the best, I thought. But Andrew, since you like Live 95 so much, is it the fast pace? Because that one, I felt like ratcheted up a notch on speed and pace in the way the game played too. Or was it a combination of that plus like the way the court angle changed and some of that as well? Or what do you think?
Well, I definitely like the speed, the pace of NBA Live 95 better. I think that was for the best. Maybe it did go a bit fast. They were working off the FIFA engine, so maybe it wasn't totally appropriate for basketball with the speed, but I do like the collisions as well. The speed, the pace, the collisions, the ability to be able to sprint, to have that turbo control. I do think that was an underrated improvement. Not a lot of games in the early 90s had that sprint control. And they worked without them. You'd work the angles or whatever, and plays with different speeds, and you get in the flow, and it would work. But having that turbo control, that sprint control, was such a big improvement. But I didn't actually play Lakers vs. Celtics and NBA Showdown until years later. I had NBA Live 95 first. I was really getting into the NBA around that time. That was the game that got me into basketball gaming, that and NBA Jam Tournament Edition for PC, actually. So I didn't play those earlier games until later, so I'm coming at them after playing much more advanced games and later NBA Live games as well, and later NBA Jam games, so it was difficult to appreciate at the time, being much younger. Going back now, giving them a proper chance, I can certainly appreciate them, and I do. And as I said, my NBA Showdown retrospective and Bulls vs. Blazers retrospective a few weeks back, in way back Wednesday, that I do appreciate them more, I can enjoy them, but I do miss some of the enhancements of Live 95. The isometric angle, I think, is iconic, although I do like the broadcast view as well of those NBA playoff series. But just having that extra pace, being able to accelerate with sprint, with turbo, and having some of those, and not having so many offensive fouls every time I touch a player, and there's a bit more physicality allowed. They clean stuff like that up as well, and of course having roster editing and the other enhancements that came along at the time. Although Showdown is pretty complete with a full season mode, obviously, but yeah, a lot of it is because my introduction was later on. It's harder to go back and appreciate, certainly when you're younger, when I first played them. But playing them now, I definitely see the positives, the strengths of those early titles, but I still think Live 95 was this huge jump that it was for the best, was for the betterment of the genre, really.
Yeah, I agree. Live 95 was a total game changer there. It really propelled that franchise for years after that, I felt like. I have a hard time today going back and playing some of those games, but like the Bulls versus Blazers, just I don't think is all that fun anymore because it's so slow. Like Live 95 and sometimes Showdown, I'll go play in some of that, or I'll play some of the Super NES games just because they still feel kind of fast paced. One other unsung hero I always felt that was really great was Arch Rivals. I don't know if you ever played that one.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I thought that was, but I've recently tried to play that, and I'm like, I've forgotten how slow paced this game was because every time there's a call, the ref jumps on the screen and blows his whistle, or if there's a basket, there's a very long cutscene in between each one. Maybe I'm just getting impatient as I get older. I don't know.
Yeah, that was
ridiculous.
Yeah.
we've talked about that many times, that kills that game for me, honestly, because if they didn't have that long interruption after every single made basket, I'd be jumping on the sticks playing that more, because the action itself is fun. It's fast. It can get competitive. I mean, you're punching each other, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that's just a terrible design choice, the cutscenes.
Yeah, I would love to see that game be redone and remove some of those cutscenes if it was, basically a modern day NBA Jam version of that. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and my come up with basketball video games is a little bit different than Andrew, but my first game was Double Dribble in the late 80s. That was the first basketball game I ever played, and then it was Jordan versus Bird, right? And then it was, I want to say, Bulls versus Blazers. Then it was Tecmo Super NBA Basketball. Then it was NBA Showdown. And then it trickled into those Super NES titles that you were talking about, some of the other ones, like NCAA Basketball, right? Like that was a big one in my house. And then for Sega, it was Dick Vitale's Awesome Baby College Basketball. And then, for Sega, it was Coach K College Basketball. And then, the NBA Lives and whatnot, Live 95, 96. And I feel like I was there from the beginning of console basketball gaming, just because I was there for Double Dribble, even though that was technically not the beginning, but it felt like it was. So I feel like I have a really good base for discussing these games. And I think you feel the same way, Ken, is, if somebody wants to talk about basketball video games, you feel equipped to have that conversation, because it's like, I've been experiencing this for 30 plus years.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm very well equipped to discuss that, just like you or I be equipped to discuss why we think Michael Jordan is the greatest and LeBron is not, in our opinion. Because most of the people that think LeBron is the great, they're in their 20s, right? They didn't see those guys play.
That's why I never felt that old head was an insult, right? Like you're basically knocking me, knocking Andrew, knocking Ken for having the experience, for watching more basketball, right? For watching more players, watching more teams. How is that an insult? How is that a knock on us? Like, good, call me an old head, right?
Right. Bring it on.
I'm just thinking that these days, with the Lord of the Rings movies, actually work, because you got this wise old wizard, and he's like, we need to do this, destroy the One Ring. Oh, shut up, old head. We'll do it our way. Like they're saying.
Right.
So, Ken, I have a couple questions real quick before we close the show. So you were a standout high school basketball player. You played in an alumni game recently. You've been involved with real basketball for a long time. How are you staying involved in the game today?
Oh yeah, great question. So thankfully I've got several children, and I've been able to get them passionate about something I've been so passionate about. And so it really started with them. About the time I quit competitively playing, in these rec leagues and things like that, my kids were hitting 6, 7, and 8, and they're wanting to, Dad, let's go play outside, let's go do this, let's go do that. That has been a huge, it's really rejuvenated my love for the game. Not that I've ever lost it, but it's a different type of rejuvenation for that love, that passion. So, now I'm out there with my 12-year-old teaching him moves that, like, we didn't do growing up, because you didn't do a double crossover. Only Tim Hardaway did that. We were taught growing up like that was unnecessary. At least I was. But that's not how the game is taught to younger kids today. So part of it is I got to do it with my kids. So I'm coaching them. So I'm a high school coach, and then I've been a middle school coach for like 10 years now. So that's one way. But it also keeps me fresh on my skills, because I've got to stay up to date on, what different training things are and things like that. So I think in a way it's kept me young for the most part, or at least I think I'm younger. That's how I've been able to stay involved. And you and I have talked trash on, we need to get together and have a 3-point contest and those things. But I still get out and play once in a while. And you never lose the love to shoot baskets. So yeah, I'm always doing that as well too.
So I've thought about having a horse competition with you, but on video, like we both have a camera set up and we're both at a court. or we could also make it a 3-point contest with the whole split screen, like the real NBA 3-point contest. Like something like that would be a lot of fun. And there are a couple courts in my area where I could get that set up, at least on my end, and I'm sure the same with you. And I think the community would like to see that. Andrew, I might have to try to get that together.
Oh, for sure.
That'd be awesome. We need to do it.
Staying involved, same thing. Like I don't coach, but I'm playing in leagues now and whatnot. And I know that Andrew stated there's a court nearby that he's been wanting to go out and take some shots, put some shots up on and whatnot. So yeah, and it does keep you young. Like it makes you, I don't know, like I feel like I have an even further appreciation for the game today than I did when I was younger. Right. And how important it is to stay involved in it. Whether it be with basketball, video games, or, playing real basketball, etc. So the last question for the show, Ken, the Celtics, they're in the playoffs right now. They're up 2-1 on the Orlando Magic in the first round of the playoffs. Have you been keeping up with the Celtics? What impresses you about this team? Do you think they can go all the way again?
Yeah, I've kept up with them a fair amount, not as much as I have most of my life, just because the game has evolved in a way that it doesn't excite me. Probably the same reason it doesn't excite you the way it once did, at least the NBA level. I think they've got the pieces together to win again. It's always going to come down to the superstars and how well they can carry in those key moments, especially in today's NBA. You've got to have a couple, which is why I think someone like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have that ability, but they've also got some other really big key pieces around them, which if you're going to win a title at any level, you're going to have those couple of superstars, and you're going to have the right role players around them. I'll tell you the thing I love seeing, though, is Al Horford, after all these years, is still playing a huge role in the team. Like, they're not winning without him. And it's awesome to see a guy out there that's, been around as long as he has.
Nice to see a vet being like sticking around in the league, right? And not being pushed out and being embraced by an organization.
That's it.
Yeah.
He's being embraced by an organization because he's got a job and a role that he can fulfill that somebody else can't. Or he's already on another team, doing it or something, and still plays a valuable role. There's a lot to be said for a guy like that. And I think not only, does he have the skill set there, he's probably a really good locker room guy to help kind of gel all that together in a way too. Otherwise, an old veteran like that's not going to be there unless they're bringing some value like that as well too.
Oh, for sure. And it's something that flies under the radar because a lot of the media focuses so much on LeBron's longevity, and obviously LeBron does have impressive longevity, but there are other players that have been in the league 15, 16, 20 years. Chris Paul is in his 20th season this year as well, that are still doing good things. And when we focus so much on one player, and as much attention as Kobe got and as MJ got back in the 90s, obviously there wasn't this singular focus on just the one player to the exclusion of giving other players props. So it's nice to see other players around the league. Mike Conley is still around doing some pretty good things for the Timberwolves as well. So that's nice to see these veterans are not being pushed out of the league.
Yeah. They're certainly not those guys that are retired at the Y that you can't figure out how am I going to score on this guy or get around this guy and somehow he still kills me. But they're making a huge impact still. So it's awesome to see those guys still have a huge impact. And it's real easy to forget some of those guys you don't hear about them because they're not a LeBron James, right? At the level he is. But they're still making a huge impact on teams. So it's nice to just know that guys like that can still hang around and play for a very long time as long as they take care of themselves and add value to the team.
Last question about the Celtics. What are your thoughts on Payton Pritchard? So we have a basketball chat and you get together with a bunch of guys every Saturday morning, and there's about 15 to 20 of us in this chat. And there's just been this debate going on for days amongst pretty much everybody about Payton Pritchard. Would he be a capable second or third best player on a playoff team on another team? Does he not play enough? Should he have the ball more? What do you think of Payton Pritchard's role on this team? But also, could he be a higher impact player on another team? And the reason why this is in doubt is look what happened to Terry Rozier, right? He wasn't a winner when he went to Charlotte. He wasn't a winner when he went to Miami. He put up numbers. He put up scoring numbers, but he never was a capable first, second, or third option. But if you remember correctly, when he was with the Celtics and he wasn't playing as much and he was having some big playoff performances, they were talking about him as, hey, he could be that guy on another team. So what are your thoughts on Payton Pritchard and not only his role on the Celtics, but could he be that guy?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that Terry Rozier comparison is really good. He is one of those guys that when he left Boston, I thought, wow, he's going to do just unbelievable things, maybe. And just because somebody I think has a lot of talent and might be capable of putting numbers, at least putting up numbers in theory, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate to actually being able to do that. Like, I think Payton Pritchard, he's a sixth man for a reason. There's a reason he's not starting. And yes, he probably could start on some other teams, of course. But part of the reason he's effective with what he does is he's coming in as the sixth man doing so well, capable of starting on other teams. But now he's getting some of those minutes against the other team's 5, 6, and 7 guy that might not be starting at all anywhere else. That's the reason they're the 6th, 7th, 8th player. Like I see that in high school basketball all the time. If you're 4, 5, and 6 player are just, great athletes and capable of doing some things, they might be able to totally run over the other team's 1, 2, and 3 person if that's all they have. What I mean is, I think Payton Pritchard, just like Terry Rozier, has a really good, capable role of what he does and stays within his lane with that. And
I agree. Yeah.
Doesn't play out of that. Whereas I think what happened to Rozier is he got handed a little bit more freedom and the expectations went up, and some guys just don't deliver in that situation. And that's okay.
Right. You can put up numbers. You can put up numbers on a bad team. Yeah. One of the examples I use, and I've used it on past shows, is like a guy like Don McClain on that terrible Bullets team, right? I think he averaged like 18 points a game. But that team was absolutely dreadful, terrible. And if you tried to put him, make him a number 1 option or a number 2 scoring option, that's what happens, right? You're going to be at the bottom of the league. But sure, his basketball card might look a little bit better, right? So, and I definitely agree. Pritchard's coming in against a lot of times second unit guys. And, when he is in with some of the starters, how much attention is on him and how much is actually on like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Porzingis when he's playing and whatnot. Those guys take priority as far as defensive schemes and matchups over a guy like Pritchard. So, more often than not, he's going to have a favorable matchup, right? Or at least one that's comparable to him. But then you make him the main guy and all of a sudden he's the target. And now Jaylen Brown's not a distraction anymore, right? Tatum's not a distraction anymore. So I definitely agree. I think that he could be a starter on many teams, but I don't think he could ever be a first, second, or third best on a good playoff team.
I would agree. You have a player like Tatum and Brown that are really good. They're really good 1 and 2 for almost every team out there. So, of course, they're going to get a lot of the attention, right? Now you've got a guy like Pritchard that comes in, and he's Boston's, 5th, 6th guy. Well, he's way better than the other team's 5th, 6th guy. That's why he's putting up those big numbers.
Andrew, can you think of a comparison? We brought up a few here. I'm sure you could think of one where it was like they thought this guy could be that guy. And, it either didn't work out or that guy never got a chance, but you knew that he wasn't going to be able to be that guy.
I mean, there's been so many over the years, I suppose. I think you brought up a great one with Scary Terry, obviously. You put up numbers on that team. Clearly you have skill, but there's a difference between that bona fide superstar and leader and player who can get stats and lead a team to victory, as you said, as opposed to that player that comes in and gets them against the second unit or gets them because they're kind of the only option on a bad team or a mediocre team.
Yeah, I don't think a guy, I'll give an example from the past. I don't think Tony Kukoc could have been a main guy.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Right.
I think that he was a very good role player, but his skill set and whatnot, and his two-way play and all of that, it didn't scream, I can be a first or second best on a championship or big playoff team. But Ken, you've been following the Celtics. Did you follow them through the season, or have you mostly just been watching in the playoffs?
Most probably about All-Star break on. And as the playoffs get closer, I pay attention to them more and more.
Yeah.
And I would say the last 3 or 4 seasons have been like that. Whereas, 7-8 years ago, I followed them in the off season and tracked every move.
Wait a minute, you're saying that you're not following the prestigious NBA Cup?
That is definitely what I'm saying.
Ken, do you remember when Darius Miles played for the Celtics in the preseason?
No.
Yeah, I talked about it on a previous show. Do you remember when Darko was with the Celtics for a hot minute?
Oh, briefly.
Yeah, good times as a Celtics fan. So yeah, Ken, thanks for coming on the show again. We really appreciate your time, and we're going to have you on again soon.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you having me, and appreciate our community and everyone out there listening and following along.
And be sure to check out Ken's gaming truck if you are in that area, and of course the NBA 2K19 Retro Season mods. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, thank you for tuning in, and please join us again next week and every week on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay updated with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
You can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on the NLSC, D43, and on YouTube, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep a look to the NLSC itself, nb-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone!